Alright, today's topic is building shelter in the woods in a survival situation. Lots of different things to talk about when it kind of comes to the philosophy and thinking through your shelter. To start out, first you want to think about, is this long-term or short-term? So if you're talking about short-term, I got to get through the night, that's going to be different than if you're trying to make something where you're going to be in the woods for an extended amount of time. So that's going to influence what you do when you actually think about constructing your shelter. Second thing is obviously going to be your climate or your environment. I'm in the eastern woodlands here. It's been pretty good weather, but rain can come and go every day, so it's something you got to be aware of. It's August, so I'm not going to be dealing with snow, but if it was in the winter, or the fall, I'd have to think about the temperature issues as well. And then the other things we want to think about when it comes to safety have to do with a classic word you probably know is widow makers. So when you're setting up your shelter, is there anything overhead that if a good storm came through, it could fall and crush you? And I'll show you in a second, there's a couple trees that have fallen and they're leaning against other trees, and you got to make an assessment. Is that in a solid enough position where I could use it as a ridgepole in my shelter, or no, I want to stay away from it because that thing could fall down? So let's take a look at those and then we'll start constructing a shelter. As you can see here, we've got this pole at about a 45-degree angle, and it's resting on that tree, and this tree comes down here by where my tripod is. But there's some people who might look at this and say, okay, well, I've got it, my ridge pole, I can just put poles on one side to make a lean-to, or poles on two sides to make a debris hut. Let me show you real quick what this tree is resting on. Zoom in up here. It's a little bit hard to see, but that tiny little branch, it's probably, like a thumb's width, maybe a little bit bigger, is what this thing is resting on. So again, if you got a big breeze in the middle of the night, or you just bumped it the wrong way, that could come crashing down on you. So probably not a great setup for a shelter. Here you can see the root system of a tree that's been knocked over by some storm. That base is very solid. That's not going to kick out anywhere. As I go up the tree, you can see, comparing it to the size of my hand, you're talking probably 6 to 9 inches across from top to bottom. And then you go continually up the tree here, and you can see part of what it's resting on is a dead branch there from the tree that could be a ridgepole. And then it just kind of goes in and wedges up. Let me walk over here a little bit. Into another tree, and that tree that it's leaning on is starting to lean too. So for me, I look at both these types of options, for a pre-built ridgepole, and just say, I'm going to pass. If this thing somehow kicked out and fell on you in the middle of the night, you would not be in a good situation. So let's start from the ground up and work on our shelter. What we're working on today is called a Wikiup. It's a very basic shelter. It's best for arid climates where you're not going to get a lot of rain. But because the weather is pretty decent today, if I was in a survival situation, said I just need to get a shelter up and get myself protected from maybe a little wind at night, any kind of, again, predators, things that may be out there, this is a good basic option that's pretty easy to put together. So you can see here, I've got these 3 long poles, and what I'm going to do is, using some paracord that I had on my bracelet that I just disassembled today, I'm going to lash those 3 together, stand up, and that's going to form essentially the basic structure of the Wikiup. So let's start with that. Here's my basic shelter structure. I got these 3 poles that I've lashed together with some paracord up there, and it's big enough at the bottom that I can put my head to the back pole, and then my feet would stick out a little bit on the front end. I got to make a judgment when you're making this type of structure to say, okay, if it's really small, then I'll keep a lot of the heat in, but then I may be uncomfortable trying to sleep during the night. If it's too big, I'm going to let the heat escape. So here's here's kind of my middle ground. My feet stick out a little bit, and I would put a fire out front, so hopefully that would keep them warm. Now I put it here on the ground, as you can see, just a lot of leaves that I could push out of the way. There was a spot over here that does have some very nice moss, and this is actually relatively dry now. The problem is, again, we've got looks like blackberry bushes over here that are growing, and I don't want to roll into those in the middle of the night. I don't want to have to tear them out, so I'm just going to avoid that, set up my structure over here. Once you have your basic structure up, what I like to do is put these cross beams on, and I've used paracord where I had paracord. I didn't want to cut it, so I only had 2 pieces left. But what I did is I just got some young, relatively supple trees that are growing, and just cut them, and then I weaved them around the sticks to keep them together, so that, if, again, we get a breeze, I bump the shelter in the middle of the night, things don't fall apart. I generally don't tie these like a knot. I just weave them through kind of like your basket weaving. And then over here you can see I even used some grasses and some more of these together. So now I've got a structure that's got your base, and then about halfway up you've got another kind of cross beam, and then all the way up to the top. The advantage of this crossbeam is that if you find sticks to lean up against your Wikiup, you don't have to worry about them all being as tall as your main 3 ridge poles. So now we'll start putting some sides on this. Now after about 45 minutes to an hour of work, this is what it looks like. You can see we've got a lot of the structure built in there. And as you get more wood on your Wikiup, you're going to get more solidity to your structure. And as you get more wood on your Wikiup, you can start to weave branches through. You can see up here on the top, some of those guys don't go all the way to the bottom. They just are kind of weaved into the actual structure. So I would definitely put more wood on this. But this gives you a sense of, give yourself about an hour in an eastern woodland forest, and you can put together a very basic structure. Let me wrap up the video, give you some final thoughts, and we'll close things out. Sitting here inside the Wikiup now, and just want to give you a couple of final closing thoughts. First is that once you have your structure, if you're going to be dealing with any kind of temperature issues, particularly at night, and you always want to plan ahead because you think, oh, it's really hot during the day, but it can get quite cold at night. Here in New Hampshire last night it was about 64 degrees. So what I would do is I would go out and probably get some live boughs and put it on the ground to kind of get that insulation to deal with the conduction issue, get myself up off the earth a little bit. And then if you can find dead leaves that don't have any buggers in them and aren't, that they're nice and dry, you can use that for insulation around yourself. And we'll do other videos on debris huts and other ways to create shelters. Again, this is a super basic shelter. It does do a couple things. As I build up the outside a little bit more and I put a fire out in front here, that'll get some of the heat reflected inside. If I put a reflecting rock up there or something to reflect the heat in, that'll get some of the heat in here to warm me up. The other thing that I find shelter does really well is that it gives you this peace of mind that you have a home base. So if you're in a survival situation where things have really gone poorly and you're out stuck in the middle of the woods, you set up a shelter and you say, okay, now I know where I can go back to for my home base to kind of regroup and get my head back in the game. So there's a mental piece to that too. And then the other thing is at night, there's all kinds of noises if you get into some deep woods and you're wondering, what's that sound, what's this, what's that? You've got this shelter around you. It makes you feel a little bit protected. Overall, a simple structure, great for drier areas, the Wikiup, and check back for some other videos on survival structures, survival shelters. Appreciate you guys watching the video. Please like and subscribe to Everyday Tactical Vids. Follow us on Twitter and check us out on Facebook. See you soon.